Well, hello and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and an actor as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And today, Jeremy, we're going to continue with our open discussion. And you've got a little smirk on your face, so I'm thinking you've got a good topic for us today to start with.
No, as soon as you say like when you say actor, I love it. I love the just like the differences in dynamic and the things that you add. So it just made me smile having you here. So that's why I smile. But for the topic, we're gonna talk about toxic leadership. LindaAnn and I were talking on Monday, and she said try to find some, any research on solutions. Because a lot of the research, and we know this with a lot of topics, it's like, here's the dangers of it, here's how to recognize it. And man, is there not a whole lot out there. Even looking at the references for some of the articles I found, they reference books, not necessarily research. And what I found isn't actual research on it because I couldn't find anything just in terms of solutions. So what I found, LindaAnn, hey, I was just saying how you mentioned like look at solutions. Okay, so didn't know if you heard me. Um, so what I found were based on like some people that are in the field and have written books about it, and maybe the research is in their books. I haven't, didn't buy the books and read all the books to prepare for today, but I'm going to share some of the resources uh, that we have, and I think to start out, it's important that we think of when toxicity. There's toxic people, there's toxic cultures, there's toxic environment, and then there's toxic teams, and then there's toxic other things. So I'll try to be, actually, I can be as specific as possible with some of the research that I share as we get into this. And the first, so there's three things. It's not going to take a whole lot of time, but these are the important ones. There is one. So here's some like in terms of how to deal with actual toxic people. Marco Tavanti is the author of this, and it's an article called Managing Toxic Leaders, Dysfunctional Patterns in Organizational Leadership, and How to Deal with Them. So I'm going to start off and share some. All right, here's some how-tos. Uh, Tom, I know you not like the numbers, so I highlighted this in like an orange. Gallup estimates that a typical organization has $3,400 in lost productivity for every 10 grand in payroll due to disengaged employees, which is one of the primary symptoms of dysfunctional toxic leaders. So that's a big number. And what this author in particular does is he looks at some of the strategies that are listed by other people. And under this section, good, Heather Morton. Okay, so Heather's going to share an example. I see you're popping in. So when I'm done with this research, she's got a really good one for us today to share. So I'm glad you came. All right, I gotta get focused here. All right, strategies to survive and overcome toxic leaders include, and there's a lot. I'm not going to read all of them, but the references share in the chat, and it'll be in the show notes in the podcast, so anyone can go right to them. But basically, overall, take risks by confronting your own anxiety, seek the leader within you, and foster accountability and democratic processes. Appreciate the more realistic leaders instead of the paradise promising toxic leaders. And that points to the dangers of, okay, I'm just going to accept this and accept a situation and maybe even be a willing follower without being willing. So that there's kind of a caution there. And then also forgo the illusion that the followers of a toxic leader, or anyone really, are the chosen ones. Um, there's also some suggestions from Marcia Wicker, author of Toxic Leader, written in 1996. That was a good year. Suggests to be aware that toxic leadership is a real threat to organizational health. Yes, we get that. Talk to non talk to talk eh, talk to toxic leaders in a non-threatening way, but let them know you are aware. Put everything in writing because you may need documentation later on. That's a big one that we all know we should do, but sometimes people forget. Work through organizational channels. Some of these are does, but they're important to note. Identify trustworthy leaders in an organization and reach out to them. Be firm, refuse to engage them, etc. There's another book from Dr. Robert Sutton. His book, The No Asshole Rule, Building a Civilized Workplace and Surviving One That Isn't, is the result of, oh, this is good, several years of studying dysfunctional behaviors in leaders. So good, there's some studies involved. I haven't looked at the actual book. So some of his recommendations, and this is for if you are a toxic leader and you know and you have a desire to change, then it's face your face your past and try to be more authentic. Avoid making people feel humiliated, de-energized, or belittled. Um, don't think that basically be humble. Some of these things, again, they're duh, but they're worth calling out because they're the result, according to this guy, of his research. Uh, this is interesting. Subordinates may find that some of these behavioral antidotes interventions can be helpful. Preferably, these are done in consultation with a coach and a mentor. We love coach and mentor. So, one, develop indifference and emotional detachment. So, I'm just reading that. I don't know how I feel about that exactly. There's a way to do it, but if you do it too much, that's probably not good. Look for small wins and small victories that keep you going. Limit your exposure with a toxic individual. Use whistleblower HR channels. Stand up to them and hold them accountable. And there's a note here. One brave person really can't do much. It's a support system. And it says, after all, if it takes a village to raise a child, then it certainly takes an organization working together to change the tide of toxicity. And also, before I forget to say this, sometimes you just got to realize when to let people go. Like these highly toxic leaders, just letting them go. I'm going to move on real quick to Kurapets. Kurapets, that's the name. The article is called Toxic Workplace Problem Description and Search for Management Solutions. I highlighted just a little bit here. I couldn't get to the actual study, but in the abstract, it tells a little bit what the results were. So what they did is they studied people that were in a toxic environment, and they found that basically majority of people experience some level of a toxic environment, no matter where they work. Employees with high values of individual components of the psychological well-being scale, mainly self-acceptance and autonomy, are less acceptable to the toxicity of the organizational environment. So now we're moving over to environment instead of person. So if you can practice self-acceptance and autonomy and determine your locus of control, internal, external, and work on that, you can build yourself up better to deal with that type of environment. That's the main takeaway there. Three main strategies that employees chose when confronted with a highly toxic environment were active rejection, passive rejection, and escape. And escape, I'm sure, means a lot of different things there. Lastly, this is also interesting. Author Sydney Yankowitz. The title is Combating Four Harmful Workplace Mindsets: Tips on Battling Common Downfalls of Veterinary Teams and How to Fix a Toxic Clinic Culture. I found this interesting because it's one of those things that attends to this whole thing of toxic environments and cultures, but from a completely different angle. And there's a little bit of reading into it that is important. So the four main toxicities are ambiguity, stagnation, sacrifice, and authority. And that kind of makes me think back to that other article. If we all, anyone is likely going to experience some form of toxicity. It doesn't have to be in your face. You feel like, you're scared to go to work every day. It doesn't have to be that bad to be, technically a toxic state. So one thing that they mentioned to do is to reduce ambiguity. I mean, there is toxicity in organizations where people say, look, I have pretty poor role clarity. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm held accountable for things that I shouldn't be doing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where it's very simple, where teams, departments, companies can basically have a concise document. You outline each role and what are the responsibilities related to that role. So again, and now we're taking this, Tom, and using this as a particular roadmap of, all right, here's four things that can be done. Um, the other thing is holding regular staff meetings. And I thought, man, this is pretty remedial, but it is, but it's not, because when you hold those regular staff meetings and have that clear communication, it provides opportunity for open discussion, but more importantly, it provides an opportunity for reinforcement of the social norms, whatever they be. And I wrote down, I pulled from this and made some notes, um, which I'm going to get to in a second after I read these highlights. Sacrifice. So the other factor of sacrifice. Um, if you have weak or no boundaries at work, you don't have room for downtime. You can't be innovative, et cetera, et cetera. So encourage healthy boundaries. So again, that's going to be something that with these meetings, for example, can be something that's discussed. These authors also suggest the have a mission statement. We all make jokes about the mission statement. A company has one, we don't know what it is, we don't see it, we act it, but the higher ups don't. We get all that. But if you have a mission statement, value statement of this is what we value and this is what we're doing, and you, I don't know, you even lead every meeting like that, that can be a real game changer just in terms of either reducing a current toxic environment or toxic factors that people experience,
Right.
or even preventing one. And the last thing here is authority, which is there's a distinct line of you have a hierarchy, you feel low, you feel intimidated if you're not up there. So that's where it's you have maybe your vision statement, your value statement, mission says staff members at any skill level should be respectful of each other no matter what, and then having people act lead and use those particular behaviors. The last thing I'll add when I put this down is recognize that people are more than their jobs. This can help with the judgy toxic person, reducing all that. This can also help with the whole avoiding burnout and everything that goes in there. But that's something that, I mean, I can see a mission statement. Like maybe it's not just, hey, here's our company mission statement, but here's our team mission statement, or here's our mission statement for us as employees all together. But that might include we recognize that our employees are more than their jobs. We don't blame other people when they make mistakes, but we make sure everyone is involved in finding a solution. And it could also include something to the effect of uh, we also value holding meetings to give everyone a chance to enforce these social norms, et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, I think back to that some of this might sound remedial, but what if we, Tom, like what if we vision out the outcome before discounting how impactful these seemingly simple things could be? Because if you're an employee and you're in a toxic environment, what would be basically it's all right, what would be different if, let me get this back up. Um, if instead of the environment you're at now, every employee at every level treated each other with respect. You had weekly meetings, and the values were stated up front, and the leaders continually mentioned that we are going to have, here's our clear roles. We're continuing to work on that. If there's any ambiguity in your role, let's have a separate meeting about that. Um, Back to the other thing. Too many open things, Tom. A little disjointed today. And oh my gosh, my company realizes that our employees are more than just their job. So I'm more than just an employee. I'm a person too.
Right.
Uh, I'm not blamed anymore when a mistake is made. So all those particular things, while these might seem like these are kind of like wonky little things, they're not if you look at the end and these things are implemented and true to what employees and experience versus what it looks like. So that, Tom, is a compilation of the research I had. And I'll turn it over to you. And whenever you're ready, Heather's got a really good example to share.
Great. I'll come to you in a second, Heather. But Jeremy, I have a question for you because, I think there's some times when it's obvious for some people that they're working in a toxic environment. But as you mentioned, for some people it might not be really clear. And so I want to give you a real life example. And of course, all my real life being an actor are TV shows. So the TV show The Office, is that a toxic work environment? It's funny. I'm not sure if I'd want to work in that office.
I have not watched enough of that. I've watched it sporadically, and I know some of you are going to say, "Are you serious? You've never really sat down and like got into it?" I've never got into it. So I can't speak to that. My answer, just seeing a little bit of it, is no, it's not toxic. It's a fun, funny work environment, but I probably haven't seen enough of it. So I'll let someone else attend to that throughout the hour if they want to.
All right. That and Parks and Rec. One of those has to be toxic. I'm sure of it. So thank you very much. Heather, I want to hear what you found.
Oh, well, it's not like research that I found, it's an experience that I endured.
Even better. Real life. You weren't on
Okay,
The
so
Office, were you?
right. So fortunately, my LinkedIn is not up to date, so you guys can't creep on what the company is. But for the last 6 months, I was helping on as a contract worker for this company, very large company, and I was a content development manager, which I was brought on. I had a set like one like role, set of responsibilities, expectations, and then it was very quickly realized that the hiring staff and managers and then vice president, all other managers on this team were just wildly not aware of how this project was supposed to go. And so a lot of it got dumped onto me and my co-manager to figure out. And when we would bring to them, because like, okay, I'm an IO, she's not, but she's also a manager. We're the same level. We had a lot of really good ideas. Everything that we brought in was just shot down. Nope, you should just do it this way. Nope, we're not going to approve that. And so, shockingly, unsurprisingly, around mid-January, it just blew up. And so we were blamed for it, which, okay. I was just like, you know what, this is fine. Like I will take responsibility on what I did, but not on all this other thing. So we gave some more examples of what we could do. It kept getting shot down. Well, when we would meet with the other company that we were like contracted out to work with, the higher managers, like those that were above me, were consistently lying to them, saying, "Oh, well, Heather's done this. Everything's under control. We're going to have it to you." And I'm sitting here on these meetings like, this is not true. This is like, none of this is accurate. And you guys, I would just turn my camera off because I can't hide my face. And so it got to the point where last month I gave my notice. I said, I cannot continue to be in these meetings where you're lying to the client. You are messaging me all hours of the night, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Heather, we need this right now. And I'm like, I am not logging on at 2 in the morning to do something for you. And so I gave my notice and it was met with this wild, like, you can't leave us. I can't believe you would leave us. What is going on? We are very inclusive. We like to build trust. We want to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, this is toxic. I cannot handle this. Well, then my co-manager also gave her notice. And then it just like imploded on, why would you guys leave? Like, this is your project. Why would you want to like contribute to its downfall? And I was like, no, here are all of my receipts, because I'm a receipt keeper. All of my receipts of things that I have done to try and fix this. And then it, like the stages of grief, they were begging, they were trying to rationalize, like, oh, you won't leave, it'll be fine. And I was like, no, like tomorrow is my last day, literally tomorrow. And so they were like, well, what if we just give you like, so they've offered my co-manager $35,000 just to stay. And then she was like, no, that's not worth it. It's not worth our like lack of peace and psychological safety. We were being threatened on a weekly basis. They were yelling at us on top of everything else going on. So I am sprinting away from this job.
That sounds more like a cult than a job.
Right?
And yeah, those experiences really do happen. And thank you very much for sharing that. And as you started talking, the hands started popping up. So thanks for launching us, Heather. Brendan, you've always got great advice. Let's go to you.
Thank you, Tom. So as Heather was speaking, I can't help but really think that uh, this seems to be a common issue in the consulting world, where everyone is viewed as expendable. Um, you know, I'm actually shocked that they offered somebody $30,000 because I would see it more as like, that's fine, I'll just find somebody to replace you. But I think there's two dynamics in play here. So there's the first, that it's your relationship with the consulting firm that you're working with, which can be toxic within itself. But then there's also the relationship with the client that you're working with that can also be toxic. And I remember somebody who I worked with in the past. I think they came in and they had worked in HR before, but not HR consulting. So when they came in, it was going to be like, oh, they're going to listen to everything I said. And I was like, no, you've clearly never been through change management communications with these clients, because they've done things a certain way. You kind of have to break them out of that change cycle of like, well, this is the way we've always done it, and those sorts of issues. And I will say that if you're consulting in a toxic environment, you can get pulled into that environment very quickly, and it's very easy to do. So that's kind of where you need to take your step back and go, okay, no, I work for this company or myself or whatever the relationship is. And I'm here to help and make recommendations, because it is so easy to just get sucked into that toxic environment through the consulting engagement.
If I want to control my employees, because really and truly, I mean, what Heather just described does kind of sound like a cult to me. Can I use those tactics and be like an abusive employer and actually get people's loyalty and have them stay?
So here's the flip side to that. You can try to do those things, but I was actually in the car this morning. I was like, I'm probably just a little bit of a step down from being able to like do employment law type practices, but I'm never going to confess that I'm an employment lawyer. But I know it well enough to be able to give advice on that. And I would say if a company's really doing those types of things, really easy now, because based off of Heather's situation, sounds like there's at least three people here. Sounds like three people will claim a hostile work environment. Sounds like three people where you can find a lawyer who will say that sounds like a hostile work environment. And all of a sudden they're going to be looking for financial gain. So you can try to do those things as running your company, but I would just recommend that you run a much nicer organization, be fair to people, fair and equitable, and just try to do what's right by them through your business, and not like sacrifice people at the altar of your objectives and goals of the organization. Everyone can accomplish these things together, but you also have to be strategic enough and knowledgeable enough to be able to do those things.
Do we need there to be a mindset change in the C-suite of you can be a humanitarian or even just a nice guy and still run a profitable organization?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I read a book a month or so ago, called The Power of Nice. And that has a lot of key aspects of it where you can do things and you don't like, and don't mistake nice for being a pushover. You can still be nice and respectful and hold your ground without being a jackass when things come to a head. And I think there's definitely a fine balance for those things. But like, as I look towards the future of what I'm trying to grow for my organization, I look forward to being like having, positive outcomes with people and helping them approach their, not only, career goals, but also like their personal and life goals. I think that's what's so exciting about it. And I just think people get to these points where they're so higher up and they start to ignore these things. And it's like, kids, if you're only in this to make money, yeah, you're probably going to get those more toxic environments. But if you're in this to, okay, I can make money, but also help people and help them make money and provide for their family, that's a really awesome way to look at how you can just impact the world.
What a wonderful world it would be. Thank you very, very much. Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, Tom, to your point about, Parks and Rec or The Office and things like that, to me, that's one of those that perception is reality. If you find it amusing, then that's great. But if the environment is toxic because there's incompetence at the top, then, it's a much different sort of lens to look through it. I think people would rather laugh than, cry with, all the examples of poor to very poor leadership that you get. I do hesitate, and Heather's story absolutely qualifies as toxic, but I think toxic is one of the most overused psychological buzzwords of the last 4 or 5 years, because there is going to be conflict, there is going to be gossip, there is going to be all these things because there's human connection in an office and an organization. And if you don't like it, it's very dismissive, because if you just say, oh, that's toxic, well, then it's not your fault and you don't have anything or agency to do better or to improve the situation. So just a grain of salt there, but the impacts of truly toxic environments weigh heavily. And I think to Jeremy's summary of some of the solutions, take your agency, take a deep breath, find your values and how you want to proceed in the situation, because really you're the only person that you can control. And there's all sorts of ways to just think about, okay, if we're in the rush and there's a panic and that's when people are snapping, okay, well, maybe we can show some grace and then unpack it after the fact. But if it's always that red line, go hard, go loud, go whatever, then that does take an overall toll. And, once is an incident, twice is, whatever it is, three times or more, now we have a pattern. And that's what you're dealing with in reality.
If I could ask you, Nick, you've got great experience working with people who are in the front lines of food service. I'm an actor. I've been there. How do you keep a restaurant from becoming a toxic environment? Because, oh my God, the people in the restaurant, the customers, they pick that up really quick.
It's a constant struggle. The good news is, you get to reset the next day. There's not a ton of carryover unless you've truly, you're on bar rescue and your reputation is damaged and nobody's coming through the door. But as long as people are coming through the door, every day is kind of a fresh reset, Hey, we're busy. Okay, we looked and this is where the pinch point was, last night or anything like that. There's an unpredictability in it. But I know for me in that situation, like my best bet is to go where the problem is before it's a problem. Try and find that step that's going to save somebody from going into a total meltdown, putting ego aside, putting kind of the needs of the restaurant. And I actually have last Saturday, we're in the middle of Denver Restaurant Week. So there's an increase in volume because there's more people dining out because there's great deals. And I viewed the situation one way. I cut a couple people off the floor, and sure enough, we picked up again and we were running around crazy. And the owner was not particularly pleased with the way that I had handled it. I, took a beat and said, here's what my thought process was. I wasn't trying to, send anybody into overload. And I hope that that's, a conversation that, hey, what you didn't realize is we have all these new faces. So that's what you need to consider. And just those competing interests. So I think, yes, there is the snap moment where, you're going to bark, you're going to yell, but being willing to come back and say, you know what, that was out of line, or, here's why I said that. We're good moving forward. Just that maturity to take it out of the intense pressure cooker and then stretch it back out to what are we trying to do night in and night out, not just, one table slipped up and that caused a whole cascade.
Thank you very much for that. And I love the idea of having a second chance every single day. That serves me well. Tim, let's go to you.
Yeah, Heather, Nick brought up some really good points. And to Nick's point about the term gets overused, the sort of like hostile work environment. It's just because you're not happy does not mean it's a hostile work environment. So many of you know I come from a law enforcement background, and in my role, we don't tend to leave the areas. We stay with our agencies for a long time because, if you leave you may have to start at the bottom somewhere else. So you tend to stay with one agency. And that allows, it's kind of funny how it goes around to how I got started in IO psychology, is that some bullies, or I should say, so the book I want to add to this is called The Bully at Work by Doctors Gary and Ruth Namey. I contacted them as a very lowly officer back in the day because I worked in a classic toxic work environment. And we didn't overuse it. And I want to say because you had a lack of psychological safety. That was from stem to stern. It was just a toxic work environment. But you can't go to another agency as you can in the private sector and possibly, move up a level or at least remove yourself from the situation. You either go to another agency, start at the bottom, or you just embrace the suck. So I reached out to their bullying institute, which they have, and they work with the government officials. And that started my path down the whole IL psychology path. And so, matter of fact, he was named one of the top 25 influential IL psychologists in the world. As a survey I had pulled up somewhere, lost it in the meantime. But anyway, just want to say, so to your talk about The Office versus Parks and Rec, which I like Parks and Rec better than The Office, but I would say neither one is a toxic work environment because it's a lack of psychological safety. That's the key thing. That's why it's toxic. I mean, it kills your life. It stays with you. So again, I use it as akin to like domestic violence. So the gaslighting you have in a toxic work environment, the verbal abuse, the psychological abuse, that's what truly makes a toxic work environment, taking it out of pop psychology and bringing it into Houston, we've got a problem. But
thank you very much.
I was going to say some monsters are created, the toxic environment, they let those monsters get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, they certainly do. And thank you very much for your insights because, it's hard to tell. For a lot of people, they're going to think that they are in that toxic environment, but it's not actually toxic. There is something else going on. For the example of, you could feel that you were part of the team and now no one's talking to you. You've been, taken off the team, but that's not toxic. It just feels bad. So thank you very much for that. Pamela, let's go to you.
Thanks, Tom. So mine's a bit of an experience to follow on with a few others, but points to sometimes got to let those toxic employees go. This is the opposite. So manufacturing firm, I was HR manager for a couple of business units, but my biggest business unit, multi-location, multi-state, multi-union, and people that I had worked with for several years, COVID and a merger shifted their mindset, behaviors, and someone that was just pretty much just a jerk of a manager. People couldn't see that he was actually a bully, created a toxic environment, reported it up to my VP of HR, reported directly to my manager, and tried to, have non-blaming, non-confrontatory conversations with these people and didn't care. No one above wanted to hear about anything because a couple of these people brought in money. And so they were able to get away with so much because they brought in customers, brought in more work, yada, yada, yada. And no matter how much I said, and to someone's point earlier, it's not a one-man show. You have to come at this with, from a team perspective. I ended up leaving and walking away. And, a place that I had been 6-7 years and grew, promoted, it was a bummer, but I could tell that they were on a totally different path post-merger. So even though we kind of hope that these toxic people will be seen, and I saw other people change their behaviors and just create that bullying environment, unrealistic demands, and no, that was how the culture was shifting. And I'm like, nope, I'm not going to be there. And Jeremy, just a quick aside, that article that you found for veterinary medicine, it's kind of sad that I've been out 10 years and they're still talking about the same thing that's been talked about since I got into the industry in the late 90s. So that was kind of a interesting find.
Let me ask you this, Pamela, because I agree with you, and I think that situation is more common than uncommon. And if we think back to the start of the Industrial Revolution, no owner cared about workers' rights. You know, they were coming off the farm like fresh eggs. If one falls and breaks, I can get another one. And we still seem to have some of that mentality, especially with the larger corporations, where the distance between even that middle manager and that C-suite is a huge distance. And I can see people in the C-suite who go, I don't really care if my middle manager is toxic. It improves the bottom line. So how do we shift that conversation?
So, great question.
Could you then
I
solve
think
all
part
the
of
world's
it,
problems after that?
right? I think part of it is generational mindset, the power distance, the hierarchies, your CEOs and your C-suites. They just have a particular mindset, and there's not because the middle management has just been decimated over the last 20 to 40 years. You don't have that translational ability between the C-suite down to your frontline workers. So that's part of it, but it's also just a hierarchy, that structure that is just common in US organizations. And I see more of that moving away with a lot of the startups, a lot of the businesses started by the millennials and so forth. But I think a lot of that is not going to change until we move away from certain generations that are so used to power, hierarchy, structure.
So what you're really saying is until the guys who look like me are retired, it's going to be a struggle.
But I will say we do have to be careful of younger generations glomming on to the like of the power and the money that comes with it. So it's how do we combat, how do we educate, and even that could be.
If you hear someone in their 20s going, I'm going to run this company like grandpa did, we could be in trouble. Thank you very much for that, Pamela. Lee, we need some of your knowledge. Let's go to you.
It's a fascinating topic, and one that, it gets a lot of the pop psychology, as somebody mentioned earlier. There hasn't been enough research, but there's been lots of talk. And I think sometimes we get a little bit of confusion because sometimes you may not have the toxic workplace, but what you have is a toxic relationship. Because you can have a worker and a supervisor who just don't get along. And that relationship can be toxic, where that supervisor and other workers may have a different relationship, and they may not see the same thing. And so then that changes the whole thing, where you got one guy's going, "Oh man, this place is toxic," and rah, 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 and other people are going, "What are you talking about, man? I don't have any issues." And so then you have the issues, and now you have another thing. You got one guy, and I think it was Tim was talking about psychological safety. You got one guy who definitely does not have it, and everybody else is going, "Well, I'm fine, man. I'm going to do my 8, and I'm going to go home and have a beer. It's all good," And so then you have a whole different thing. And can that be solved? If someone else sees it, yes. If the supervisor has a little bit of self, reflection and goes, maybe it's me. Maybe. Chances are, probably not. Somebody's going to have to leave. Is in most cases. Now, does that mean all the time? No, absolutely not. But but that happens a lot more than we necessarily think. That it's just a conflict of personalities or something. Call it whatever. Maybe it's generational, maybe it's cultural, maybe it's who knows. It's going to be different depending on the situation and the industry, and there's so many factors. You can't generalize this very easily. Now the nice thing is that most of the time in industry you can go and you can find another job. Maybe it'll take you a little while, maybe you have to suck it up for a bit, but you have that option. My personal experience was, kind of like Tim was talking about with law enforcement. Well, in the military, I had an extremely toxic supervisor in the military. And guess what you can't do? You can't quit. You can't go somewhere else. You are stuck, my friend. You got a contract, and there is nothing you can do about it. Well, there's very little you can do about it. And especially in our situation, because we did report it. We went to the inspector general. We did all the things that you're supposed to do. And guess what they did? Very little. And so we dealt with it. And they were all mad about it and up in arms. And then basically nothing happened. And we just had to wait it out. Now, the bright side is, there are assignments. And so you know that there's a shelf life. And so at some point, one of you is moving. So thankfully, I was able to keep my tenuous hold on sanity long enough for her to leave. And then I went on with my life. But it was, I'm not gonna lie, it was tough. And it required some chats with a professional, and let me just put out there to the world at large, it is okay to seek help if you are in this situation. In fact, I highly encourage you to seek help. There is lots of resources out there. Chances are your organization has an employee resource line. Make use of it. It's what they pay for, and there's a lot more than just sitting with your buddies at the bar grousing about your job. There are professional resources available, and I highly recommend you make use of those. Because a good quality team to make your life and career better are a coach and a therapist. They have different jobs, but they do complement each other. One looking forward, one looking back. But either one of them will help you move forward in your life and career. So, a little plug there for the powers that be. There are those situations where, like law enforcement, military, whatever, where you don't really have a choice. And sometimes you just got to buckle up and ride the bumpy ride down the road till something changes. But if you are that person in the higher situation, maybe, you have a chance. And, I had a conversation with one of my employees just, last week, I think. She was scared to tell me that she was taking classes. And not because of me, but because of previous experience.
Yeah.
Because her experience had been that and of all things, she's getting a degree in psychology. And I'm like, as if I'm going to have a problem with that. But, but it doesn't apply to her current job. And so her previous experience had been that when looking to the future and something that doesn't, you're bettering yourself, that doesn't apply to your current position, supervisors take a dim view on that because it doesn't apply to today. And I'm like, oh no, that's not how we roll around here. I'm worried about today, yes, but I'm also worried about what your role down the road, because if you're good, I expect you to go and do things, and someday you're going to leave my team and I'm going to cry, but I'm going to be happy for you. And that's how I do things. And, and it was one of those from her, but I'm like, this is crazy. Absolutely crazy that she was concerned about telling me that she was taking courses. What am I going to do? Fire you because you're getting a degree? I mean, seriously? That is a problem that we have in our workplace right now.
Yeah.
And that's wrong.
Let me ask you, Lee, because if here's the scenario. I feel like I'm in a toxic team and everybody else has no idea what I'm talking about. Is there a possibility that the toxic relationship is my relationship to the job?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a possibility that it's either a not necessarily a fit between you and the job itself, or it could be you and like the uppers above you, like a difference in vision. I mean, there's some cognitive dissonance going on at some point there. Can that be resolved? Sure, it can, of course. But if there comes to be between you and those above you, if there's a meeting of the minds to where you can come to that agreement, it kind of falls to you, unfortunately, unless the person above you suddenly has an epiphany that goes, that Tom guy, we gotta do better by him, and it could happen, but and there's some psychology and there's some managing up there, and you absolutely can. Now let me put another disclaimer out to the world at large. Do not try to manipulate those above you. Do not do that. But you can influence, which is not the same thing, those above you by being very positive, talking about the mutual wins. How can we make this better? How can I make you look better? Not only is this something that I'm proposing, this is something that will make you and our team look better. So I'm not manipulating, I'm not doing whatever. I'm saying, hey, look, this is not all about me. This is about the team. This is about you. This is how we as a group can all look better. We can all be rock stars. Hey, look, rising tide raises all boats here. So yes, you absolutely can make that better. And it could just be that you're getting bored. You could do more. You got that feeling somewhere down in you that there's more for me and I'm just not getting it. And maybe you just hadn't recognized that yet. And maybe you need to pull a Stuart Smalley and look in the mirror and go, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
Thank you very much, Lee. I feel like I need a little mini IO psychologist sitting on my shoulder all day. And you too at home can have your very own IO psychologist. Just contact us at CBOC. We'll set you up. They're low maintenance. LindaAnn, let's go to you.
I don't know if we're all low maintenance, Tom. So just to start where Lee left off, one is using, as you're focusing on creating a message that might help move the team forward, using the values and the mission statement as a tool is very, very helpful. And I suggest you do that whether you're in a toxic environment or a healthy environment, because it really creates a different sense of message, right? And it doesn't make you aren't labeled with that message. So it's not somebody who's, complaining about the situation or perceived as whining or anything like that. It's you. This is what what we're here to do. This is what's going on. And one of the ways we can fix this problem is to make sure we're focused on values and mission and so forth. So it really takes you can deliver the message, but it takes the pressure off the person in a lot of cases. And so I highly, highly recommend that. To one of the other messages that Lee had is, if you are in a toxic situation, it can do serious damage to you as a person, as a professional. And I've known someone, and I'll have a conversation with her later this evening. She was in a very toxic environment. And once she left it took probably 18 months in her new job with an excellent leader to undo some of that damage and just get her back to ground zero. So it can really hinder your professional progress if you continue to stay in that situation, because you just withdraw, you don't develop, all those kinds of things. There's fear developing, all of it. So Lee's advice is very sound and should be heeded especially if you're in a toxic environment. One of the things when Jeremy was talking, he talked about, kind of like it takes a village. I was in a large organization earlier in my career, and there was some real toxicity there, especially with one of the heads of the divisions. They did employee surveys, and the first time the survey came back, there were a lot of us who had given feedback within the survey, and when the survey results were presented to us, we all looked at each other and said, "What?" And I went to ask the human resources department. I said, how does this happen, right? And it was the way that the data was reported, that a lot of the leadership was grouped together, so the data was diluted. And so they said, in order to have it be specific, people needed to write the comments about a particular individual. So, but they only did those surveys every 2 years. So we all made sure that during the next survey, we wrote comments about the person, used the title of the person, and that did result in them moving that individual. It was a little bit of the Catholic system, but where they just move you to another church. But it had some effect. But that's a long-term process, right? So the other, and to what Nick had mentioned, in his situation, he was talking about every day was a new day. Some toxic people will count on that and expect that and use it to not be accountable for their actions. Right. So you have to be real careful. There might be a good side to that, but then there's this other side where they'll gaslight you. Well, aren't you forgiving? We're human, all these kinds of stuff, and just do it over again. So
yeah, I never thought of that. That's why I'm not an IO psychologist or work in HR. I just assume everyone's going to do the right thing. Whoops. Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, it's one of those things when we talk about the term toxic and you think about Superfund sites across the country, it takes a lot to clean up, something that is truly toxic. And the idea of corporate PTSD and being impacted by that for so long, like I've seen it in my career, where it does take a while to not see to jump at shadows or anything like that. And I think that's both for the individual and for the organization. And so it's even more important to play from a stance of value to say, okay, we're not going to tolerate this behavior, and we're going to have to turn the ship, very, very slowly. But it is going to take time to get everybody to a place where everybody just kind of takes a deep breath and unclenches a little bit. And to your point earlier, if you look around and you're the only one who sees the problem, maybe you are the problem. And that would be an awful place to be in. But at the same point, once you recognize that, then you can start fixing it. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity, and I think a lot of material out there that we could generate to say, this is how we solve it. And there's no one size fits all. There's no magic bullet. What's toxic on Monday may not be toxic on Tuesday. It's that weird organizational chemistry where, when Tom's in the room, everything goes great. But when Tom's not around, that's when, bullying or whatever happens. So
Right.
Just trying to find those little indicators of what's causing the toxic behavior and trying to stay in the realm of behavior instead of, well, that person is toxic. Well, yeah, they might be the problem, but that doesn't diminish who they are on a human scale.
Right. Let me put this out to you, Nick, and this might be for everybody, but especially with some of the stuff that LindaAnn was saying, about toxic environments and how they can affect you negatively. if we step outside of the world of business and we look at other toxic environments, for example, one that I'm thinking of is a family and a marriage that can become toxic, and it can cause damage to both parties. And we have psychologists who deal exclusively with those types of issues. So if you are in a toxic marriage, you can reach out for help. If you are in a toxic work environment, who do you reach out to?
I mean, my default would be a counselor. That's dealing with the impact of that and the ripples that it can have. If you're in a toxic work environment, you're probably going to bring that home despite your best efforts. You're going to kick the dog or scream at the kids, and it's not their fault. So I think that first and foremost, you have to check on and regulate yourself. And then once you've got a handle on what you can and can't do, then looking to, IOs as a potential source of how do we shift the culture? How do we mend the culture? How do we make it a better place for people to come to work and enjoy what they do?
Well, I can share with the audience that having a panel of IO psychologists handy when I need advice about how to get through a difficult time at work, it's nice to have. Thank you very much for that, LindaAnn. Back to you.
So to answer your question, one thing is a lot of companies have an EAP, which is an employee assistance program, and they don't even know it in a lot of cases, right? So effective managers should use it to their advantage, and that can be for, anything that's affecting your ability to work well, right? Whether it's going through a divorce, alcoholism, or toxicity in the workplace, right? And usually, if you're a company owner or leader and are not familiar, they are not expensive per employee, right? But they do usually offer somewhere between, I don't know, usually 3 or 4 to sometimes 6 or 8 sessions to help you work through things. And if it's short term, that can be resolved in those sessions. And if it's something more long-term issue like substance abuse or something like that, then they give you a referral out. It can also protect you as an employee. For example, if you're going through something that's it's affecting your work, and you go to the EAP and they say, okay, you need to get into a 12-step program, or you need to be detoxed or something like that, or whatever it is, you need outside counseling for marriage or whatever that is, children issues, they can stem the tide of any disciplinary action because of your performance, because they cannot report back to your employer exactly what you're doing or the progress that you're making, but they can say you are in compliance with the process of recovery of wherever it is, right? So that they, and to give you enough time to get back on your feet within the, for the issue of performance. It can also, now if you don't comply, they can say you're not complying, and then the disciplinary process can proceed. But it's a really good tool. Sometimes you just need a place to vent, like, what the hell is going on? Is it me? Is it someone else? Is this really toxic? It's a really good temperature check for you to just go in a safe place. And so you don't have to, vent to your workers and then they're passing on all of that information, right? So I highly recommend it to both employees and to employers. It's a very, very effective tool.
I found most of my sessions with psychologists usually end with me going, "Oh, I never thought about that." Problem solved. Thank you very much, LindaAnn. Jeremy, back to you. Our time is up, and we just started, and it just kept going, and we just kept going. We covered a lot of great stuff today.
We did. It makes me think, like with what LindaAnn just did. Tom, you might be familiar with TV shows, movies, things that incorporate acting. As is with real life, whenever somebody is about to leave a room, but they stop at the door and they turn around and they say something, that's usually the most important thing they're going to say. And I like how Linda she just walked out of there, but then she came back in and she just said what is a great takeaway for us today. So thanks, LindaAnn. And thanks for providing me with that visualization of you at a door. Very cool. We have an expert member happy hour coming up on the 25th. We've got open discussion again next week. And if anyone's going to PSYOP, Emmy is going to do while she's at PSYOP that Thursday. So PSYOP is it's the first week in April. She's going to do it live from there. So connect with Emmy if you're going to be at PSYOP. I'm sure she's going to figure out how to make that one pretty cool. And what else?
We should start.
Go ahead.
We should start going to other people's conventions, not IO psychology conventions, but we should hold a discussion panel at like any business convention.
As long as we can eat their food, I like that idea. It's not bad.
Let's do Work Cookie Live.
Tom, don't put ideas in our heads that are actually going to work and we could actually do, because we'll start doing those kinds of things. I like it. Good stuff, everyone. I love where we are, where we take things, and then where we end up. I guess that's it. That's a wrap. Should I count us out, Tom?
Count us out. We'll see everyone back here in 1 week's time.
And a special thanks to everyone who shared their experience today.
Yeah.
Counting out in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.